Good morning. This is Steve Cantrell with DBA Fundamentals, past virtual group. And today we have a really good session that I've been looking forward to, my romantic relations with Powershell Generally. And wasn't it supposed to have in DBA Tools specifically? Anyway, he's not talking yet. Anyway, the speaker is Magnus Ahlkvist, and he's the organizer for SQL Friday, and among a lot of other things, but I'll let him explain that in just a few minutes. Let me go ahead to the next session. We would not be able to bring these to you without our sponsors. Our first sponsor is DB Watch, Database Control. They're a great company, and we had a session about a month and a half or 2 months ago that talks about their software. If you want to go check it out, I would suggest doing that. Check our session out, and if you're interested in a free trial, they're great people to work with, and they'll work with you. Go to dbwatch.com and check out their enterprise management software. Our other sponsor that just came in recently was SentryOne. They've been a sponsor for a long time, our first sponsor ever. It's great products, a suite of products that spans multiple environments now. Both of these companies are similar in a way, but not exactly the same. But SentryOne has a really strong presence in the SQL arena, and that's how they got started, but they changed their name to SentryOne so they could spread out. Here's a link to a lot of helpful resources at their site, and they also will provide free downloads and a lot of other helpful stuff. SQLperformance.com, the blog site, helpful resources. You can go ask questions at answers.sqlperformance.com related to performance. If you want to download some of their products and try this out on your own stuff, and then send them questions in answers.sqlperformance.com, they'll help you out. So go try that, and of course tell them that we sent you. That makes it a lot better the next time for us. Magnus Ahlkvist is an independent database consultant and certified trainer, and I'm looking forward to that part especially because there's a big difference in people that really know their stuff and people that can train and actually explain it to where you can understand it. So I've never heard Magnus speak, but well, I've talked to him beforehand, but I've never heard one of his sessions, so I'm looking forward to that. Since we don't have Past Summit to advertise, we're finished for now. So I'm going to turn it over to Magnus. Let me change you to presenter and see if we can manage to make this happen.
And let's see if I can show my screen.
There you go.
Do I show the right screen? I don't know.
It looks like it's the correct screen.
All right, perfect.
I'm going to mute myself and let you do your stuff then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, ask questions if you need. And Magnus said that he'll answer them as we go along. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not very used to this presentation platform, but I guess as usual there is a question window and you just type questions in there and someone will relay them to me because I will not be able to monitor the question window. Anyway, thanks for having me. It's nice. I've never done a virtual group presentation before, or virtual chapter or virtual group. I hear both. I don't know which is right. The presentation is called My Romantic Relation with Powershell Generally and DBA Tools especially. And I kind of made the presentation as I tried to learn DBA tools, and then I changed it and threw the whole presentation away because I learned some more PowerShell, and it's been living with me for a while, and I made it public about a year ago. So I've done this presentation on group by and on some user groups, but I think you will find it a bit, if you've seen it on group by, you will probably find it a little bit different this time because it changes every time. Not too much about me, but a few words. Magnus Ahlkvist, yeah, that's me. I'm an independent consultant and trainers. When I do SQL training, it's with a training center called Cornerstone in Sweden, and the rest of the consultant business is within my own company, where I am fortunately the only employee, which is good because I would probably make a terrible boss. So I'm fine with having no one to have me as the boss, and I'm fine with not having one either. There is a link to my blog, www.tsequel.nu. Don't expect too much of it. I update it, let's say, once a month at the most. I have started the blog series about SQL Server transactional replication and doing it in availability groups and so on. So if you're interested in that, you might want to check it out. The presentation and especially the demo code for the presentation is on github.com/transmocopter, and just click through to presentations, and this one is under a subfolder called I love DBA tools. I think that's about it. What we're going to talk about today, if I can just change slides, yay, is DBA tools. A little bit about PowerShell itself, but my phone started talking with me. I don't know why. Sorry. So DBA tools especially is what I'm going to focus on, but a little bit about PowerShell and tiny bit about Docker containers, which is what I use for my lab environment. What is DBA tools then? Well, DBA tools is a PowerShell module. It was started by Chrissy Lemaire, who is a DBA, and she started it when doing migrations between, well, basically moving instances, upgrading, and so on and so forth. And she needed some scripts to automate it, so she wrote a lot of scripts, and she realized that, hey, I've got something that could be a module, and created a module of it. After a while, made it public. So a lot of the focus in DBA tools initially was around migration, but now if you would go to dbatools.io and just check out the list of commands, you have everything in there. Some people call it the script version of Management Studio, and it's not wrong, I think, because you have everything you can do in Management Studio with very few exceptions. You can do it in PowerShell with DBA tools, and that of course helps a lot when you need to automate things and you need to redo it. I started using DBA tools in a consultant assignment for a company. They were moving all of their infrastructure from an on-premise data center, well, a data center in Stockholm, to Azure, and they were doing basically a lift and shift for the most part. They replaced some networking components with something else and some queues and stuff in the software with the more service-oriented architecture in Azure. But for the databases, it was mostly a lift and shift of database instances to virtual machines where we had installed SQL. And we needed to come up with a log shipping functionality that could log ship using a storage container in Azure rather than having a file share as the common file area. We couldn't use availability groups or mirroring or something like that because we were running on standard edition, and with the amount of transactions we took in, thousands per second, we couldn't do it because the latency was too bad between the data center and Azure. So we we realized that, okay, we have to do log shipping, because then at least we don't have to have it synchronously done. And yeah, we kind of managed to take the whole infrastructure, including all the applications, databases, and application servers. We had some phone switches along, which we moved to the Google Cloud. And we did it with, I think, 5 or 10 minutes downtime, and just made a failover. And most of that time was just checking that everything was up and running. And the reason we managed to do it without any errors, or with very few errors and no stopping errors, was because we could replay it. So we had done this failover in test environments, which were complete replicas of the production environment 10, 15 times. So that was kind of the key. And we couldn't have done it 10, 15 times without automating and scripting everything. So that's why DBATools was the savior in that case. So that's my final demo that I'm going to show today, is a kind of minimized version of that log shipping. So organizer stopped showing your webcam, but I guess you can still see the presentation, and you don't need to see my mugshot anyway. Just shout if anything is not shown properly. I'm going to skip ahead to the first demo. And to be honest, I don't like PowerPoint that much. So I can show you the whole deck right now. So DBATools first demo, and then I have cool things to automate that I want to show you after the first demo, which is setting up servers for backing up to and restoring from an Azure Blob Storage in an automated manner. Installing a new SQL Server instance, and that's a Windows SQL Server instance that we're going to look at. And to be honest, I'm not going to actually install it because it's boring to watch, but I'm just going to show you some DBATools commands to do it. I'm going to spend some time talking about automated patching of SQL Server and show you what kind of support you have in DBATools for that. And then finally, we're going to look at some migration scenarios with migrating logins and jobs, and set up log shipping, which is you can set up proper log shipping with a normal file share, but I'm going to show you my version of log shipping, which I kind of came up with using a Azure storage container instead. So it's not the built-in log shipping, but log shipping is kind of simple. So you take transaction log backups and you restore them in the other end, and you just keep track of the log sequence numbers that you have restored, so you don't restore the same thing twice. And then the next demo, and then famous last words. So I'm going to skip PowerPoint and move over to Visual Studio Code. And the first thing is that I want to do is to set up my lab environment. And I usually like to show this part as well, because I think using Docker containers is such a productivity boost for development environments, because it's so easy to create a container with SQL Server, run your workloads, and then just tear it down, or you can keep it and have it as your instance, but you don't have to clutter your own like laptop or computer with Windows SQL Server instances. So if you're not familiar with Docker for Windows or Docker at all, I'm not going to spend an awful lot of time on it, but let's say it's not a virtual machine. It's tinier than a virtual machine. A container is just the software that you want to run, but you do it in a virtualized manner. So you get exactly a container containing just the software SQL Server that you want to run. And the container is sharing the operating system with its host. So when I run a SQL Server instance in a Docker container, I'm going to run a Linux version of SQL Server, which means I have in the background the virtual machine, which is the host, which is sharing the operating system with all the Docker containers. So the first thing we want to do is do a Docker pull, and Docker pull will go to this place, mcr.microsoft.com/msql/server, and then look for the tag latest, and the latest is going to be the latest SQL Server 2019 version. So if I run this, I'm not going to do an awful lot because I already pulled that container. But if there had been a cumulative update coming out since I last did my pull, then I would get that downloaded and ready to use. Since SQL Server, it's data, so you probably want to persist the data. And the lifetime of a container is when you kill the container, you kill everything that's in it. But there is a way to persist the data by creating a Docker volume. So a Docker volume is just a file system path. It could be a virtual disk that you point to, but in my case, it's just going to be a file system path that is mounted into my container, so that when I destroy the container and create it again, I'm still going to have my data. So I'm going to create 2 Docker volumes, which I call SQL Volume 1 and 2. So it takes no time. And then I'm going to create 2 SQL Server instances with the command docker create. And there are some parameters that you need to send. The most important is probably this one, some port mapping. So I map my local port 1402 and 1401 to the container port 1433, which is the SQL Server standard port. So I'm going to run these. And that's how long it takes to create 2 instances of SQL Server using Docker. So you can maybe compare that with running an automated installation of Windows SQL Server and compare how long that takes. And then when I'm done with that, I can do Docker start to actually start the containers. And now they are started and they're running the startup sequence of SQL Server. And if you want to see how far it got, you can look with Docker logs into SQL 1. And what you will then see is the error log from SQL Server. So let's look at that a couple of times. And now you see a very familiar sequence, startup sequence for SQL Server. I help development teams within Client's Place. They have something like 80 SQL Server instances for developers. And right now we do it on its Windows instances. And when a new developer starts, we need to create a new one in a server, find the place for it. But using this technology, which is going to replace what we have done so far, it's going to be a matter of seconds to set up a development environment for a new developer, which is, it's mind-blowing to me. Now let's look at a few DBATools commands. As I told you, I mapped the port numbers 1402 and 1401 to the local port number inside the Docker container. So when I need to connect to my SQL Server instance inside the Docker container, I need to use port numbers 1401 and 1402. And I don't really like that. I don't like that I have to remember that. So instead of doing that, you can create aliases. You've always been able to create an alias in SQL Server in the configuration manager. And one thing I always do is I create an alias, I connect to it, it works, and then someone else tells me it doesn't work from Excel. Because there is 2 places where you need to create the alias, the 32-bit configuration and the 64-bit configuration. If you do it with the DBATools command, new DBA client alias, it's going to take care of both for you. So that alone is a reason to use DBATools for it, I think. Now, running new DBA client alias requires an elevated PowerShell prompt, and I don't have that inside Visual Studio Code. and I already did create the aliases. So just to prove that they are there, we can run get DBA client alias to just explore what I have created. So I run that command, and we can scroll through this list and see that I have SQL2 and SQL1 as 32-bit architecture. I have the 64-bit and this is not what I expected, to be honest, because I expected both 32-bit and 64-bit. So let's actually open up an elevated prompt and create them properly. Otherwise, we'll probably run into problems with the rest of the demos. So let's do Windows PowerShell run as admin and hit yes and move it to the screen, which you can see. There we go. And then just do some copy paste here. This command and a lot of commands in DBATools are idempotent. What does that mean? Well, that means you can run them over and over and over again without them throwing an error in your face. If you already did create the object or the thing that you want to create with the DBATools command, it will just tell you it worked, or sometimes it will tell you I skipped this because you already had it. And you can use the force flag to remove and recreate the objects that you want to create. But now we see that we have the 32-bit and the 64-bit aliases created for both SQL1 and SQL2. So I'm happy. Let's throw this one away and go back to Visual Studio Code. Let's start with how you can get a hold of DBATools as a module. It's very easy. If you have PowerShell, you will have a command which is named install module. So just run install module DBATools -repository PS gallery on a new installation of Windows with PowerShell on it. PS gallery is going to be the default repository. And then you can choose to run it scoped for just you or for all users. And if you scope it to all users, you're going to have to need an elevated prompt. Otherwise, if you do current user, you can just run it in a normal PowerShell prompt without having an administrator prompt for it. The force flag will give you, if there is a new version of DBATools, you will get that version on top of any existing version that you already had installed. So once you have done install module, I already have already done it. Then you can, from within DBATools, you can ask DBATools to update itself. And for the most part, install module is just fine. You can do install module with force to get the new version. But if you use update DBATools, you can throw on the -development switch, which will give you the development branch of DBATools. So if you want to check out the functionality that is being built by all the amazing people that contribute their time and knowledge to DBATools, then you can just start using the development branch by using update DBATools. And well, by all means, just if you're interested in something that is being built and you want to see if it's what you think it is, do this on a virtual machine and start using it and give your feedback to the developers, because they're really happy with people testing the things they're doing. So if you find any errors, they'd rather have you find that out before it goes public, I'm sure. Anyway, so now I have DBATools installed, and then I'm ready to connect to my containers. And since they're Linux containers, I don't have the Windows authentication. I could have that with a lot of work, which I won't do because it's my local box and I just want to connect to it. So I'm going to create a secure password, which I will do with convert to secure string and then send in the plain text password as a parameter to convert to secure string. This is not how you should do it, of course. In your scripts, if they are for production, then you should have the password in a key store and don't put it into your code. But for the sake of simplicity, this is what I do. And then when you have the password in a secure string, you can create a Powershell credential for the SA account with the secure password. So these are just variables that I will need to be able to connect to my containers. I'm going to skip through these, I think. The next thing, if I become responsible for some kind of infrastructure, I always look, is there a database created in every instance where I can put my stuff, the DBA stuff? And with the DBA stuff, I mean things like Brent Ozar's first responder kit or Ola Hallengren's maintenance scripts and Adam Mechanic's SB Who is Active and tons more. And usually I want to have a database where I put that so I don't have to store all those things in master. So let's go ahead and do that with DBA tools. There is a commandlet new DBA database. The parameters that you send to it is the SQL instance, the name of the SQL instance. So I'm gonna send in SQL1. If you're not using Windows authentication, you're gonna want to send in a SQL credential, and I already created the credential in a variable just seconds ago, and then the name of the database, who is going to be the owner, and then of course you can instruct DBA tools to create the database with the data files on the D drive and the log files on the L drive and have this or that many files and so on. But I'm going to go with the standard settings for now. I'm going to run it and wait a few seconds because there are some file system operations to do. This is not DBA tools being slow. This is the file system not responding very fast, but I've got it. And what I get back is a kind of DBA tool specific object, return object from the commandlet. So it will give me the computer name that I just installed it on, the instance name, the name of the database, the recovery model, and so on. The size of it, collation, things that you could enter as parameters when you create it. But this is kind of nice, and this is what all the commands in DBA tools will do. They will give you an object as a return, not just an OK. And you can save that into a variable and then use it further on in your scripting. So that's kind of useful. Now, let's make my code a little bigger again. As I told you, I usually want to have Ola Hallengren's maintenance solution. And those that create the DBA tools, they also realize that most people use Ola Hallengren's maintenance solution for index maintenance, and some people even use it for backup restore. So they created a commandlet, install DBA maintenance solution. And if I run this commandlet, I'll give it the name of the SQL instance that I want to install Ola Hallengren's maintenance solutions on, credentials to connect, and which database I want to create it in, and then replace existing. Replace existing will, well, it will just remove everything that has to do with Ola Hallengren's maintenance solution and then download the latest version for you. So this will require you to have internet connectivity if you just run it like this. If you don't have internet connectivity on the machine where you need to install it, then I suggest either to set up a repository which that server can access, or you run it from your own machine. If you can access the server from your machine, then you can run the install DBA maintenance solution on your machine. So then it will be downloaded to you and installed onto the server. But if you want to automate it, of course, then you need to put it somewhere where you can both access the DBA tools repository and the server. So let's run this one. Downloading the maintenance solution.sql, installs it, and done. And the same thing with the Brent Ozar first responder kit and ADA mechanics SB who is active stored procedure. This is going to take a little bit longer because the first responder kit is it's a few more objects to create. And when you run it, you will get a couple of warnings because the installation script for first responder kit creates objects in the wrong order. So you will have missing dependencies, which the command will warn you about. But don't worry, they are created in the same script just later on. So the next thing I want to do, I probably want to have some logins on my instance. And of course, there are commands for that too. So a new DBA login will create a new login on the SQL Server instance. Maybe by now you have realized that all commandlets within the DBA tools module are named verb. So that's how all basically PowerShell functions or commandlets are named. It's a verb and then a dash. And then anything that is created within the DBA tools module is prefixed DBA and then the noun. So new DBA login, it's because you don't want to come into an overloading situation where if you just name your function new login and then you download a module that also has a new login function, then you don't know which one is going to run. And if you make it a habit, if you create your own modules to always come up with a prefix that you put into all function names, you know that the name is going to be unique. So I'm going to create a new login. I call it DBA Login. I have a super strong password, PA55. Well, it's not very strong. This is the standard password from the Microsoft lab environments for all the mock courses within SQL Server world, but it works for a demo. I didn't show you the end of it. Password policy enforced, false. If I wouldn't have added that switch, SQL Server would probably have complained that this password is too simplistic, probably too short, if not anything else. So as you can see, when I look at my commands, I have to scroll sideways to see all the parameters. And if you want to make your code pretty when you do PowerShell programming, you want to use a technique called splatting. And it's a way to create all the parameters in a hash table before you run the command. So you set up the parameters in a splat, is what it's called. And then you enter the parameter name equals parameter value, etc. for all the parameters. And then when you run the commandlet, you can just have the splat as the only parameter, or you can make a combination. So a new DBA login, you send in the login splat, and then you can just add whatever parameters more that you want. So I don't know what else, but I don't have anything else that I want to send in, but it's a nice way to have your standard parameter set up, and then you have anything that is per instance or per line of code, basically, you can add that and the code will still be readable. And you don't have to do all this sideways scrolling to see all the code. So if I do this, I'm creating the login, my second login. and it's now created. And you get the object back, which is the login, all the details about the login that we just created. So these are the intro stuff. Let's go into some fun stuff then. I just realized that I probably didn't clean out my blob storage container. So we're going to go into my storage account in Azure and check if I have anything in there. And if we do, let's remove some of the objects I created beforehand. So portal azure.com. This, of course, could be scripted too, and should probably if you want to rerun stuff. But for now, I think it works to click my way into the Azure portal, and it's more visible for you what I have. So I have my T-SQL AB DBA fundamentals. It's a storage account, and it has a container which is named backups. So inside my backup container, I have the instance SQL1, or actually the server SQL1 with the default instance MS SQL Server, and I have some full backups. So I'm going to remove them so I don't get any confusion in my script later on. And then let's remove the log backups too. And there's going to be a few, so bear with me. And delete. So now what I have is basically a completely empty storage container. And since I created my SQL Server container, I don't have any credentials to be able to log into my storage container. So we're going to start with that to set up the credentials that are going to be used. If you want to do a backup to URL, you need to have a credential in your SQL Server, and that's what we're going to create now for my storage container. So let's start with creating the credential variables. I create a variable to store the URL of my storage container. And then inside Azure, I have created a shared access signature, which I will use for authentication in my credential object in SQL Server. And well, I'm going to share this, but you're not going to be able to use it because I'm going to destroy this resource group after the lab. But it's really easy to just create a shared access signature inside your own container, and then just make sure that it's valid for, the default is for 24 hours. So when you create a shared access signature and you actually want to use it for something, you either want to make sure you rotate it or create new ones before the old one has expired, so you don't run into a situation where you don't have any access to your storage container from your SQL Server environment. But I've set it up to be valid for a year, so it's going to be okay for today. And I need to store that secret or the shared access signature in a secure string. So I just do convert to secure string. And then I can create a credential, which I will do with the new DBA credential command. And nothing fancy. I input the instance name, the credential to connect the SQL Server, the URL of the container, which I have in my variable up here. The identity needs to be exactly this shared access signature. For SQL Server to understand that it's not a username password authentication that it's going to do. It's going to use a shared access signature to, and it's another authentication method than username and password. And then the secure password is my shared access signature that I put into a secure string. And then you can always use the force command to replace any existing credential with the same name. So I'm going to do this on both SQL1 and SQL2, both my instances. and it's done. If I want to do it, instead of having 2 lines of code, I want to have one line of code. I just enter the instance names on the same line. This only works if you have the same login credential for both the instances. And in my case, I do have the same credentials. So if I do that, that also works, and it's going to give me exactly the same result as before. And since I use the force flag, I'm just going to overwrite the existing credential. And if you want to make it really pretty, you will want to use splatting. So if you instead create the parameters in a splat or a hash table, and then you run the new DBA credential command, works the same way, same result. And you could argue that, well, that's just a matter of taste, but I really do prefer this way of programming because it makes your code so much more readable. It's not just you that is going to look on your code if you work with anyone else. So if you haven't started using splatting, then please do. It makes your code much prettier. Having said that, I don't follow my own advice. So for the rest of the demo, it's going to be a bit mixed. So now we have a credential object, which makes it possible to do backup to URL. So I have my database name, DBA. So I'm going to try to back up the DBA database to my blob storage container. Let's see if I can make more code visible. Yeah. So I use the backup DBA database command. Commands in DBATools are very predictable. So if you want to back up something, the verb is going to be backup, and then you're going to have DBA, and then with tab completion, you're going to find whatever you can back up with DBATools. SQL instance, my credentials, my database name, and then Azure base URL is what I need to send as a parameter to make DBATools understand that I actually want to back up to a URL rather than a file system path. So that's my blob storage URL, and the type is going to be full. So I want to make a full backup. You can make a full copy only or log backup or a differential backup, of course, as you would be able to do with the backup command in SQL Server. What else is there to say? Well, let's run it. So I'm running my backup command, and you see the progress bar, and it's done, and we can jump into the storage container and see where DBATools put the backup. And it didn't put it in a nice folder structure. It just puts it into whatever URL you ask it to, unless you use this parameter, replace in name, which is a switch, which will do some fancy replacing of the Azure base URL that you send into the command. So in this case, I'm sending in the URL /server name /instance name, backup type, DB name. And these are going to be replaced with the actual server name, instance name, backup type, and database name. So if I now run this command, and it's going to take a few seconds, and we can jump into the storage container and look what's happened. And we will now see that we have SQL1, MS SQL Server, full backup of the DBA database, and there I have the backup. One thing to bear in mind is a flag called timestamp format. It's probably not super interesting for the full backup, but if you do transaction log backups more often than once a minute, you're going to have to use the parameter timestamp format to add not just the seconds, or not just the minutes, which is the default, but also the seconds to the file name, because otherwise you will get the conflict of file names when you do your backup commands. So for example, for a log shipping scenario, if you do transaction log backups every 10 seconds, you're going to have the second part of the timestamp in the file name. So I'm going to do that with the transaction log backup, and it doesn't look much different than the full backup. The only thing is I have where is it? The type. I am blind because I don't use splatting, probably. There we have dash type log. So let's run that. And I have a transaction log backup too. So let's move to the root, SQL1, MS SQL Server, and now I have a log folder with the DBA database as a folder, and then the transaction log backups I have created. And in the beginning, I talked about log shipping, and that's what I'm gonna move over to now, to kind of the final part of the demos, which is a migration scenario. So it's going to be a bit simplified, but we're going to start with the full scenario, which is to do a full instance migration, but we're not actually going to run it. So don't worry. Let me just create my credentials first. The command let's start DBA migration. It is probably the most powerful command you will find in DBATools. It will migrate an instance to another instance, and it will migrate everything unless you instruct the command to not migrate everything. And I'm going to run it with a fun little flag which is named what if. For any DB or PowerShell command that has implemented the support should process feature, you can add the what if switch, and if the programmer did his or her job properly, the command is just going to tell you what it would do if you would run it without the what if switch. So that's what I'm going to do with the start DBA migration, and the output is going to show you what the command would do. So let's run it, and let's make the output window a bit bigger. So there are a few things that it is doing. It is updating, or it's migrating server settings, it's migrating database settings, it's migrating the actual databases, the logins, the credentials, and well, a lot. And it's going to tell you that, well, for example, this login built-in /administrators, I'm not going to migrate that one because it already exists in the other end, or it's a local account, so I'm not going to create it in the other end. But if you want to manually migrate, or you want to have your own scripts to do a migration between instances, this is a pretty good runbook to start with. Just look through what the start DBA migration command will throw at you if you use the what if switch. These are things that you should consider when you do a migration. So even if you don't use start DBA migrations to migrate instances, just use it as a starting point to see what do I need to look at. Maybe you don't have all these kinds of objects. Cross database ownership chaining. If you know you don't need to think about that, well, skip it, but at least it's something to consider for your migration scenario. So let's move back to looking at the code. I'm not going to do the migration this way. I'm going to do a very simple migration by migrating logins and SQL Server agent jobs. And then I'm going to do a log shipping to migrate the databases. So with copy DBA login, I can copy all the logins from one instance to another. I can also copy individual logins, but in my scenario, I want to copy everything. And as you remember, we already created 2 logins on the instance SQL 1. So at least those 2 should be migrated. So I'm going to start doing that, copy DBA login. And I'm going to get a nice little output. And you will see what the command did. Well, it did 2 successful migrations or copies. So it copied DBA login and my second login. It didn't copy built-in /administrators because that already exists on the destination machine. And it didn't copy NT authority network service or NT authority system because they are local to the machine. So the command is trying to be smart that way, and usually is. And then I'm going to copy all the SQL Server agent job that I created on SQL 1. You have seen exactly all the steps that I have done on SQL 1, and no surprises here. There are no agent jobs. So I'm just going to get an empty result set. And this is a big difference between DBA tools and what Microsoft considers best practice for PowerShell programming. Because Microsoft says that whenever you do something and it doesn't perform anything or you get nothing in return, you should throw an error. And in DBA tools, the philosophy is to not silently continue, but give you a nice little warning, or in this case, if nothing was done by a command, don't do anything. No output, no errors. And for most of the commands in DBA tools, you can add the switch enable errors, I think, and they enable exception. And that will make DBA tools behave as per Microsoft best practice for PowerShell programming. So it's a good thing to know how error handling is usually done within DBA tools. So now I have the logins and I have the agent jobs. There were none. If there had been any jobs on SQL 1, they would now be on SQL 2. And I'm ready to start moving my data between the machines, the actual databases. And the only database I created except for the system databases is the database DBA. So we're going to use that for doing some log shipping setup between the machines. So the first thing I need is a metadata database that is used for the log shipping setup. So I'm going to create that one on the target machine. You could create it anywhere, as long as the machine that is running the scripts for log shipping can access the databases. You can put it in a Azure SQL database for all I care. As long as your script can reach that database and get the metadata, it's all fine. So I'm going to use invoke DBA query, which is just a way to run any SQL command onto an instance. To create database, I could have used a new DBA database, but I'm going to use invoke DBA query because I'm going to create some tables, etc. as well. So I will create a table which is called log shipping watermarks in my log shipping metadata database. Log shipping watermarks is just going to contain the database name that I'm log shipping, the path to the last full backup, and the log sequence number of the last restored transaction log backup that I have shipped to the secondary. And I'm gonna initialize this table by inserting the name of the database that I want to log ship, DBA, null as the last full backup that I did restore, and 0 as the last log sequence number that I restored. So let's run these. And now I have the infrastructure set up for starting log shipping. So before I can actually start the continuous log shipping, I need to do a first restore of a full backup. So to find that, I'm going to use get DBA DB backup history, which will look into an instance and get the last full in this case, which is a switch to the command. So the last full backup, if I didn't give the command any of those parameters, last full or last log or whatever, it would just give me a history of the backups that have been performed. But I'm just interested in the last full backup. So we're getting that into a variable. We could explore that variable to see what it contains. It contains a URL. So I don't need to know where the backups are stored when I run the script. I just need the place where I run the script to be able to access the instances. And the instance needs to be able to access this path, this URL. And then I do a restore DBA database onto my secondary instance, SQL2. And important, of course, don't run the recovery phase after the restore is done, because we're going to want to restore transaction logs as well. So no recovery. And this one is going to go into SQL2 and ask SQL2 to restore the DBA database from a URL. And now I can update my log shipping watermarks table with the name of the last full backup. So now I can start my actual log shipping sequence or my log shipping script. And it will start looking into the log shipping metadata database and the log shipping watermarks table to find the last log sequence number for my database. And we can run it and just output to the terminal. And we will see that the last log sequence number that we restored is 0, which means we haven't restored any transaction log backups. One thing you would want to change if you want to use this script in a production scenario is to look at the log sequence number from the full backup rather than using 0, because otherwise you could find yourself in a situation where this script is going to loop through thousands of transaction log backups which are not relevant because they were taken before the full backup. And it's not going to break anything, but it's going to take time to loop through them to find the actual transaction log backup that actually contains data. And here comes the fun stuff. For each log backup that I find using the command get DBA DB backup history against my instance SQL1 and the database DBA, where the backup type is log, and the last log sequence number is equal to or greater to my variable last log sequence number, or last LSN, which is 0 in this case. And then to put these or restore these transaction log backups in the right sequence, I need to pipe the results to sort object and sort by the property start, and that's the start date or start date time of the transaction log backup. So for each log backup that this command will return, I'm going to take the last log sequence number of that log backup and convert it to an int64 because that maps with a big int in SQL Server. I'm going to output it. This is just for the demo. You don't want to have that in your code because it's just it fills your logs with crap. But output, find the backup path in that log backup object that I got back from get DBA DB backup history. Again, don't do this type of debug output in your code. It's just for the demo. And then I'm doing a restore of that transaction log backup onto my instance SQL 2. My path is the backup path. So basically, where do I find this transaction log backup? Database name, and you would of course use variables for this instead of hard coding, but hey, it's a demo. And for every one of those, you want to run the transaction log backup with no recovery because you want to be able to restore another transaction log backup and another and another. And that's what the continue flag also will tell you, that this is a continuation of something that I started before. I have applied or restored backups and the database is in no recovery mode, or recovery phase hasn't run yet. And then as a final step, I just update my metadata with the log sequence number that I got in this transaction log backup. So let's run this whole script. I get a path, I get a restore command, which is running. And it's going to take a few seconds, and it's done. This command, restore DBA database, if you don't want a whole lot of text in your logs, you can just save the results into a variable, and then you don't have it in your terminal output. But it could be nice to have it as well because you want to see what has happened if something goes wrong. And now I can look into log shipping watermarks table to see what I have. I still only have one row, I hope. If I get any results back at all. This is interesting because sometimes Visual Studio Code doesn't want to cooperate with me when I run PowerShell scripts, and this seems to be one of those situations. So I'm gonna destroy this. I don't want to destroy the terminal. Let's see if I can hit Control-C to cancel. Okay, trust me, we have one row inside this this table. It contains now the log sequence number of the transaction log backup that we just restored. And now as a final step, I'm going to run a couple of more transaction log backups on SQL 1 and then just run the loop to restore them on SQL 2. And these two in a real scenario would of course be run one as a job to create the backups every 10 seconds, every 20 seconds, every 5 minutes, or whatever interval you will have in your log shipping. And the restore script, of course, would be running in another job, either continuously or also every 10 seconds, every 1 minute, every 10 minutes, or whatever you want. So now I can run the log shipping again, and you will get some more output from it. couple of log sequence numbers, a restore, a log sequence number, a restore. And it's with this little code, we have invented our own version of log shipping that actually supports using a Azure storage container instead of using a file system share. There are two demos that I did not, that I skipped over, which is install instance. It's super short. I would have wanted to maybe spend 2 minutes on it, but the fine thing is everything in DBA Tools is documented, so you could go to dbatools.io, check out the commands and see what you get from install DBA instance. Just very shortly, what you do get is anything you can do from an unattended install with an ini file. You have all those parameters in this command. So nothing magic, but very handy to have that also in DBA Tools or in PowerShell. This is going to create a Windows instance. And then patch servers. You're free to have a look at this demo. You probably need to change a couple of parts, but I have used more or less this. It's some loop constructs as well to patch 80 instances in an unattended manner. Just download the latest cumulative update instead of hard coding CU7. Now I think CU8 is the latest one. I got that from the DBA Tools build reference, found the latest CU, downloaded it, put it on a drive, and then looped through 80 instances. And wherever the installation cache is not broken, which it might be on a very old server, but that's not because of PowerShell. You can make an unattended installation, and test DBA build will tell you if you need to do an update or not. But if you just run update DBA instance, it won't do anything if you already have the version that is the latest. So it won't even start the exe to check. It will look at the instance and see, okay, I already have this version. I'm not going to run the installation program unless you run it with a force flag to reinstall a patch. So this is a really handy command if you manage a large infrastructure of SQL servers. That is everything. I think I'm going to go back and actually show the last slide of my PowerPoint, if I can find my mouse pointer. There we go. And this. Thanks for having me. And most of all, I wanted to show you because I want to say thank you to everyone who contributed to DBA Tools, because it really, there are some things that I do on a daily basis which I don't even know how I would manage to do it without the abilities that DBA Tools has given me. And you have so many people who put in both time and actually their own money into the project as well. So if you use DBA Tools, give them your love and give them some of your money as well, because it costs some money to manage the infrastructure required to develop such a project. Even if it's free to use, it's not free to have all the virtual machines and everything, and certificates and so on that you need to be able to publish modules and have them safely downloadable. And finally, automation replaces random mistakes with consistent errors. That's fun. Well, that you can fix once. So instead of having random errors or random mistakes that you fix manually somewhere and forget to fix it somewhere else, if you automate everything, which DBA Tools and PowerShell will help you do, you can just fix your errors in one place and rerun your script. if you created your scripts in an idempotent manner so that you can rerun them without destroying what you built the last time. That is all for me. Do we have any questions?
Hi, Magnus. Yeah, we have a few actually. A lot of people were wondering how they would get the demo scripts you provided today. I think a couple of them said they went onto the website and they get a 404 error from the link to your GitHub.
Aha, let me try. HTTPS github.com/transmocopter. And if I go to presentations, I hope this is public. It should be. I love DBATools, and then I need to actually push the code as well. So let me just do that. Oh, I need to check in before I push.
I think this is great. We're getting a view into using source control as well.
Sorry?
We're getting a view into how to use source control as well, which is great.
Yeah, don't look at how I use it though, because I check in everything into the main branch, which I haven't even renamed to main. So of course you should have a branch and then check in your code to the branch and do a pull request, but I'm the only one using this repo, so if I mess it up, it's going to be on me anyway. Path DBA fundamentals 2020 11/17. That's a good save all and commit. Sure. There are no stage changes to commit. Before I stage anything, I should probably exit my PowerPoint so I don't get the temp file for that. Let me just cancel and redo it. So, and DBA fundamentals 2011/17 part 2. And enter and yes. And then I can do either type git push here or just sync in Visual Studio Code, because Git is all integrated into Visual Studio Code. So unless something is broken, it's going to be, would you like code to periodically run git fetch? No, I want to do it on my own. And if I reload the page, I get the demos and the presentation. The presentation isn't worth much unless you want my contact details. For the rest, it's just the code that you're interested in, I'm assuming.
That's perfect. That should be up there soon enough now.
Yeah.
I've actually have 2 questions I think lead on to each other. So the first one is, you mentioned a couple of DBATools commands like new DBA instance, restore, DBA backup. How would you find these different commands?
Either by guessing or by going to this page, dbatools.io/commands, which contains all the commands that there are a few now, and more are coming. Or you can use the commandlet find DBA command, and let's say I want to find everything that has to do with backup. I can do find DBA command backup, and it will give me a list of all the commands that I think contain the word backup. So yeah, not only it actually gives me the commands where the description also contains the word backup. So these are the ways. Usually guessing works. So if I want to back up something, I can type backup DBA and then use tab completion to see what do I have. Okay, it's my service master key that I want to back up, and then I can explore by just typing the dash and use tab completion to find the different parameters. So
Yeah.
that's how I started learning, by just have a sandbox environment that no one will be angry at you if you break it, and then play along.
Well, I suppose that actually answers the follow-up question. You had a really great example of kind of a roll your own log shipping. Someone asked, how would you get involved or get started in writing those scripts and kind of using multiple commands? But I think you just answered the question there.
Yeah, and in this case, it was I got a consulting gig where the task was to make sure we could do a failover somehow to Azure, and my initial thought was to use mirroring, and then they told me, well, we use standard edition for everything. Do you think the latency can handle 2,000 transactions per second? And I said, no, most certainly not, because even between two data centers, the latency is going to hurt your performance. If you want to log or use mirroring to a virtual machine with a virtual network in Azure from your own data center, that's just not an option. So we had to figure something out. And we realized that we don't have anything built in to do log shipping using a storage account. And there was no way the network people or the security people would allow us to, from our virtual machine in Azure, access a shared path in the data center. So we just had to roll our own. And so I started small, had many manual steps that I ran, and then it became automated as we went along.
Yeah,
so I think
that's
having a real business scenario in front of you is a really good way to learn.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said there, it got more and more automated as you went along. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect at the start. You can improve it as you go ahead.
Yeah. And I think if you go to dbatools.io, this is another good way of learning. There is a book called Learn DBA Tools in a Month of Lunches. And the way it's written is you can buy it. It doesn't cost much. I don't even remember how much you have to pay for it, but it's not actually done. So it's Chris Lemaire and Rob Sewell who is writing the book. They're finished with 11 chapters, so you can have them. And if you start reading the book and actually pay for it, they will maybe even be able to use daytime work to finish the rest of the book. Otherwise, they'll have to spend the nights doing so. But it's a good book, and it's really a practical. It's meant for practical learning. It's no theoretical background. It just goes right into what you want to use Powershell and DBA tools to do.
Yeah, well, that's perfect. And that's all the questions we have. Could I ask if you could just put up the link to your GitHub again? We're just getting questions, so we can get the link. But thank you so much for coming on and giving us a presentation about Powershell and DBA tools. It's greatly appreciated, Magnus.
Thank you so much for having me. This is the URL github.com/transmocopter. It's with a K and not a C. And then I think I only have one repo, and it's the presentations repo. So in there you will have the demos for all my presentations, but I guess without context of having seen the presentations, they're not so useful. But I think these ones are, especially the log shipping part. It will show you bits and pieces within the backup history command and the restore command, so how you can use it to do a point-in-time restore even without doing the log shipping part of it.
Definitely. Most stuff coming through now is cheers and thank you and thanks for the presentation. So I'll leave this back to Steve.
Perfect. Thank you.
That was a great presentation, and we want to thank everybody for attending and try to check our website out for the next scheduled session. I've got one other thing for you guys to think about. One thing that I really do love is I love group buy. And we're trying to mimic some of the things that group buy does better than us. They bring up a bunch of sessions, 10 sessions, and let you pick which ones you would prefer to see. We can't do exactly that just because we don't have the same reach and we don't automatically have those sessions, but go ahead and email us and let us know, or contact us and let us know some of your favorite sessions. We're going to try to schedule some for 2021. If you've seen a session by a particular person and you say it was just perfect, especially given the fact that we like fundamental type sessions, let us know and we'll try to schedule that. For instance, Kimberly Tripp was stored procedure optimization. I mean, that's a classic. Paul Randall with statistics, performance tuning using weight statistics, just sessions like that. Try to let us know and we'll see what we can do about scheduling stuff like that, and really get 2021 with just tons of great sessions that everybody has looked at and said, hey, these are great. So anyway, we appreciate it, and thank you, Magnus. That was really good. We appreciate it. Talk to you later.
Thank you for having me. Yeah. Bye.
Bye.